but the kind of company, the kind of role, how you're going to fit in. You need to be very clear on that in your own head so it resonates with the person at the other end. And then this is the one that you've got to really work hard on is why are you good at it? Why are you good at doing whatever it is you're looking for? And often I'm finding people that are disoriented, they have lost a job, like I got a job, and they can't answer any of these questions. And if you can't answer these questions, I don't think you're really ready for a search. And so before you do it, we're going to walk through some of these. There's some tools. I'm not going to walk through all of them, but I want to make sure that you're in a good spot to answer this. What I'm going to talk about is actually something different, but it's useless if you don't have these things nailed down. Okay? So the way a lot of these things work, I've noticed I've been doing a lot of self-help books, I've been having coaches, and the general theme of it is how the hell do you know where you're going if you don't know where you've been? And so often what happens is, when you look ahead, it's very blurry. You don't really know where you're headed sometimes, but you know clearly where you've been and you know exactly what you've liked and what you didn't like about jobs. Now I'm going to talk about one job in particular because one of the people on the call actually worked with me at this place, a place called AMD. I worked at AMD. AMD at the group I worked in was highly dysfunctional, completely disorganized. It was one of the best jobs I've ever had in my life. And the reason why is because it was a small team of people that had very clear focus of what they wanted to do. They seemed to work really well together, as dysfunctional as they were. They were behind the main competitor, Intel, in every respect. Yet we still had loyal customers. We still understood exactly what our business was about. And I think a lot of us would still be together if world markets had gone our way. And that's the kind of story that you need to look back when you look at the rear view mirror about what are those qualities you're looking for. So generally what happens with any self-help book, working with a coach, whatever, and there's going to be, I'll talk about some of the books a little bit later, is this assessment. I don't know if you've all taken Myers-Briggs. Most of you have, I'm sure. Myers-Briggs kind of tells you a little bit about yourself. I took this horrible assessment called the Brigman highlight battery something. And basically, I've never taken an assessment where I didn't answer a single question for the 15 minutes of the test. So as an example, one of the tests were, how well can they would show a picture of a desk with a bunch of items on the desk and you look at it for 10 seconds, the picture would disappear, a new picture would reappear and it says, what's changed? And it took me, I think, 15 minutes to get half of the items on that table correct. And when I looked at my assessment later, what it told me a lot about was me. Things about like my memory, I don't really think about short-term trivial stuff. I look at big picture things. I'm very strong on people and strong on coaching. I'm not really good on certain areas. That assessment really helped understand who I was. And if you don't really understand that, there are a number of people out there, a number of organizations, a number of tools out there. Pathfinder, I think it's called StrengthsFinder is a very popular one. I'm looking at the book around the corner. StrengthsFinder is one. The Highland Battery Test is another. A Myers-Briggs, whatever it is, it's going to help you understand who you are. That assessment's really important. The other thing is to looking back at who you are. There was a book called What Color's Your Parachute? And they used to give you all these weird examples of doing things where basically what the gist of it was, you're looking back at things you've done. What is the thing that made you the most proud? I look back at the AMD job, and it wasn't my favorite job, but there were aspects of that job that I look back on that I really, really liked. I had a lot of respect for the managers, except for that Steve the Dull guy. But I had a lot of respect for the managers. I had a lot of respect for my team. I'm still in contact with many of the people from that group. And there's aspects of that business that I would love to reenact in another company down the road. And those are the things I'll be looking for. I've also discovered, I've been in this a long time, and there's gaps. I've been in product management for 10 years, and technology and the terminology changes. And I got to make sure I understand what those gaps are, and I'm still relevant, and I got to fill them in. They're not hard to do for someone that's been around as long as I have, but you need to identify them pretty quickly. Next is, once you start figuring that out, you've got to figure out who you are, and that's your brand. What I've learned to do, and this is new, I've always been told, never look old, shave, whatever, dye your hair. And I said, screw this, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to be who I am. and I started growing a beard in February. And now that COVID's going around, everyone's growing beards because no one wants to groom anymore. But you know, part of my brand that I'm looking at is I'm going to be an elder statesman. I'm going to be a modern elder. We'll talk about that in a minute. I go in and I really help companies with their process, and I've learned how to learn more about my brand. And now I'm also looking at what I've been really good at. When I look at A&D, the things I'm proud of, when I worked at Nokia for a number of years, and I'm now building my new story. The most important thing that comes out of all of this is you're not doing this alone, and that you have a supportive network of people that you're working with. What I'd recommend, we're going to talk about this a little bit later. We're going to experiment with a tool called breakout rooms in here. And Teresa's trying to figure them out. I don't know if this is going to work, but I thought we're going to have enough people on here. We've got 20 people or so on the call. We're going to go ahead and just try some breakout rooms just to see how they work, just to connect, to see if they work out, but mainly also to help you build network, right? And for you to be able to take an opportunity to talk to someone, find someone you'd like to talk to, maybe connect with. You got to find people that know who you are, that understand your superpowers, that support you. I love my wife. I've been married over 30 years. My wife isn't in this network. She doesn't know me professionally the same way that other people do. And so you ought to make sure you've got a very strong network of people that are supporting you along the way. The other thing is I've discovered, and this really sucks, is when you do this little assessment and you ask people in different age groups, and I actually, Nielsen ratings did this a couple of years ago. On a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you? And when you first get out of school, I don't think they worry about anyone below 18. If anyone below 18 is on the call, I'm going to make fun of you right now. You don't know what's going on in the world. At 18, you're highly idealistic. And as time goes on, you start kind of going down this slow, slogging hill downhill. And at the age of 50, 51, I'm just a little bit older than that, but at that age is pretty much the lowest part you're going to be feeling about yourself on an aggregate. Each one of you will be different. But the idea is a lot of us is we kind of hit this low. And there's a book from Chip Conley called Wisdom at Work, and he talks about the modern elder. And I, as much as I've promoted the book, I've never read it yet. I own it, but I haven't actually read it yet. But the concept of the book is to understand how the elder plays in society today. The modern elder is a lot of tech companies are having problems with leadership. You'll hear a lot about young tech companies of CEOs in their 30s doing stupid things, getting in trouble legally, getting in trouble with the Federal Trade Commission, all sorts of different things are going on, and they need people like us that can come in and guide. Maybe we're not the CEOs, but can come in and play a role that's an important role. So I think it's important to recognize that there is an opportunity for us, but we're in this spot where we're kind of having to refocus. All right, so I'm not going to fix all of this, but in the end of this document, in that SWOT tool, and at the end of this document, I have a bunch of things to look at. Get your bearings. If you are new to the job market and you're just trying to figure out what's going on, you've got to go to Launchpad. And when you look at this presentation, which you'll look at later, these will link to the actual sites. But Launchpad meets on Fridays. They have a tremendous amount of resources that'll help you get started. If you got emotional, that guy that I met that has face planted in the lobby was out actually at Job Seekers in the middle of a church. Job Seekers is run out of a church out of Northwest Austin. And they're going to focus on your emotional issues. You know, if you're not really ready emotionally to start your job search, it's going to come off in the interviews. It's going to come off in your attitude, and you're going to be really having a hard time getting a job. So you got to get really strong emotional support through friends or through groups like Job Seekers. Be able to answer 3 questions. So we've got Alex McCarthy's video. I have this hyperlinked. He had a really nice video about stories, about learning your stories. Also, he provided me a worksheet that I'm going to share with you also a little bit later, which is helping you define the answers to those 3 questions. What are you looking for? Why are you looking for a job? What are you looking for? And why are you good at it? And they ask you to just roll off your tongue after lots of practice. You're going to also discover a book we'll talk about. It's called Agile Careers. And it's a big, thick workbook. It only comes physically. It's not worth buying, but it's worth enough. It's only $11 to get. There's only about maybe a third of this that's worthwhile, but it helps you really look backwards at things that are important to you, help you define what you are looking for in a job and why you're going to be a good fit, and how do I reproduce the good parts of AMD, not the bad parts? How do I reproduce the good parts of some of the jobs I've done? What am I looking for in a company, and what are no-goes for me? Right. What are some things in companies if I see, I know just to walk away because I'll never want to work at that kind of place again. And that workbook is really good at helping you doing that. Another book we'll talk about called 50 Ways to Get a Job. And these are really ways of helping you uncover your story. Pam Otten is, she's spoken at I think she was the last speaker. I love Pam. Pam has got an interesting story in the fact that Pam is a teacher. And as far as I can tell, she's never played in the product community at all. She was one of the most outstanding speakers at Product Camp in the last couple of years. Everywhere I've seen her speak, people go crazy about her. I don't know what it is, but she's also written a book that is something she threw together, which is just a ton of resources that is absolutely worth every penny to help you get started in a job search. And she has no skills in doing this at all, but she's got passion, and she's funny, and she's smart. And I highly recommend Pam's book. And if you still need help, there's professional coaches. We'll talk about a couple at the end. Build or find a supportive network through friends, and maybe we build one through this organization. And read. Find books that are uplifting, things that are going to help you get through this, and read. Okay? So before I get started in my pitch, I can double check that this is the last thing I want to say before we get started. Oh, last thing before we get going. Looking for jobs in Austin. I did a whole talk on, I did a 45-minute talk on this topic alone. I'm not going to go into the whole details. But Austin has a strong history, especially in the tech space, of having a very hard time breaking in. So when Steve and I were in the chip business, one of the challenges was that we would only hire people that had electrical engineering degrees. And if you didn't have one, even as a salesperson, it was really hard to get a job, even though you may be highly skilled. As a salesperson, for whatever reason, we had our blinders on, and you had to have the specific skills we're looking for. A lot of companies are going to be looking for a lot of factors in looking for a role. And the reality is, pretty much every one of you on the call have an amazing set of skills to share with these companies, but in the way they're asking for them and the way they put the whole process in place, they're out there to defeat you. Not on purpose. They're not doing it deliberately, but they don't really understand all the skills you bring into a job. They're going to want to look at the last 2 jobs, at the competitor that they're trying to pull people from, at the exact job you did before was this job you're going to be applying for, and they want to put you from one box into another box, not recognizing that you shouldn't be fitting in their box. And so you're searching for jobs in Austin, recognize that there are what I'll call tribes, different companies have different DNA, and you have to ask yourself, do I fit in the DNA of this company? And we'll talk about all that a little bit as we get into the core of what I'm going to talk about. Okay, now, before I get started, are there any questions on this first part of the presentation? Any feedback or questions? Or did I do a great job that you got nothing? Teresa?
Hey, Mike, one question, just to confirm, will the attendees get a copy of this presentation?
Yes. That link you provided should be to a Google Doc that they can actually follow along as I'm doing it.
Ah, excellent.
You'll see a Google Doc for the presentation. It's called the COVID version. I think it's called, I forgot what I call it. SWOT at your next interview COVID edition. That's what I'm working on right now. So you'll actually have that presentation, and you'll see the last 3 slides aren't finished yet. They'll be finished by tonight. Those are links to a lot more information, but yes, they'll have access to that. Any other questions? Okay. So the idea of this is that you are coming in, and like many of you, like me at least, hopefully you guys have a lot of varied experience. I started in semiconductors. I worked for a Nokia mobile company. I've worked at big data companies. I've been in sales, I've been in marketing, I've been product management, I've been an executive. So I got all these different skill sets, but they don't always fit perfectly into one role at a company if you're applying someplace. And often what happens is you go into the interview, and how do we respond? We have a resume. We're responding to the resume by line item, everything in there. We go in and meet with people, and we respond to questions. And what I'm trying to do is provide an example of something you can do differently that changes that around a little bit, that allows you to demonstrate your skill set in a different way. But there's a lot of caution in doing this. So let me kind of explain what the cautionary comments are. So what I'm doing is we're going to create a plan where we're imagining ourselves in the role of the company, and we're going to pitch ourselves in the interview as, I'm going to do, here's what I've learned about you. Here are the things I think you're great at. Here are the things where I think I can help. Here's what I would do in the first, 90 days of the company. Disclaimers. First is, this may not always work. At some companies, like state of Texas, right? They're not interested in, they're actually have set interview questions that they go through, and they can't deviate from those questions. So no matter what you do here, it doesn't matter. They're going to ask you the 10 or 15 questions, and you're expected to respond to those. At some companies, they're going to probably have like Google has a very set of questions they go through, and they're not interested in you saving Google. They're interested in a different vetting process that doesn't pertain to anything I'm talking about here. So this may not always be ideal for some large companies, but it might be good at a small group in a large company if you know a little bit about that company. You don't do this all the time. You have 1 or 2 or 3 target customer companies that you absolutely want to work for. You've done a lot of homework on, and so these become your top prospect companies you're going to do this with. You got to be very cautious in going to a company and telling them the things that they're doing wrong. So you got to be craftful about doing it, how to do it well. We'll talk about that in a moment. And also when contacting people, what happens is we're going to go through the sequence of reaching out to former employees of a company, and you got to be very careful doing that, because not every former employee of the company is open to talking about things they just got fired from, or they may have a very jaded view that may not represent what's really going on in the company, or they may out you and tell hiring managers that someone's reaching out, and it might make you look foolish. So just be careful. That's what we're talking about here. And when you do this, we're going to walk through a slide deck you're going to actually be putting together. Never send this out. Never. Send it only with you. Either you're presenting it or you're narrating it. You're walking through it. If you ever looked at a slide deck as a standalone document, it's useless without the speaker. So don't be sending this stuff out unless it's like what I'm doing. I'm showing it to you now, and then I'm sharing it with you afterwards to help you understand, to keep notes. And again, this may not work in all cases. So what you're going to do is you're really going to do high level 3 or 4 steps. And we're going to walk through a deck in a moment to do that. The first step is you're going to look very carefully at the job role that's being posted. And there's a lot of things you need to look at the job role to make sure you understand kind of what's going on. Well, often we try to respond to that role by responding like, I could do that, I can do this, I can do this. But we need to look at that role differently by looking at it as the job poster. What is the job poster looking for? And how do you fit in that in the context of what you think the job poster is doing? The company is a lot of resources that you can learn about. And you want to learn as much about the company as you possibly can. And so we're going to talk about ways you can dig into the company and learn a lot more about them. You're going to want to research and try to understand that specific role, that specific company, understand how that applies to you if it's a good fit, and you're going to build a plan from that. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be exact, but that's kind of what the concept is. So first step is the job description. Now, first thing is actually, you probably shouldn't be even thinking about applying to a job. If you're really serious about a company and it's small enough or interesting enough, you probably shouldn't even start with the job description. You should start with, hey, I think I'm a good fit at this place. I've been looking at you guys. I see you're not doing this or not doing it well. I think I can help here, and I'd be interested in helping out. But let's put that aside for now. Let's just look at a job description. And often when I've seen a lot of we've all seen job descriptions where we look at every single line and going, I could do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. Why am I not getting the response? So a couple things you need to be careful about is, can you really do this? Does your resume demonstrate that you can do these? And what I'm recommending is when you're looking at a job description, usually they're organized in 3 or 4 sections. And each one of them, the top 3 line items, Your resume has to sing the praises that you've nailed that particular job item quickly. That your high skills, the skills that you're really, really good at, match the top line items in the major boxes of the resume. And there's a good fit. And that you've got to be candid with yourself about gaps. You know, are you certain you really understand the modern version of whatever they're talking about and understand what gaps they've got? And then once in a while, there'll be something that's just out of place on a resume that just doesn't make any sense. Just something weird or out of place. And often what I find is when you start reading through them, you realize, well, gee, a developer or an engineer wrote a job description. They don't understand what a product manager job is, and therefore they don't know how to deal with people skills, and they miswrote this, or they cut and paste it from somewhere it doesn't belong, or maybe they're having a problem and this job thing, this weird requirement represents a problem that they had with a former employee. Whatever it is, really understand the job description. Try to understand it from the perspective, not from your perspective, but from the perspective of the person that put that out, if you can. Next is really understand the company. Now, the easy thing to do, and you should do this, is go to the company website. What do they say about themselves? Often, you'll see companies have promotional things. You'll see events. You might want to go to one of their events if you see things that are going on. A lot of companies are doing things virtually right now. It's probably easy to hide into a virtual meeting somewhere so you can learn more about them. How do they communicate their values? How do they communicate and talk about their company? I'm picking on this company called Kasasa. Hopefully you know them or don't, it doesn't matter. But Kasasa is an interesting thing about them. And we'll talk about this failing. So they have a company value page they take very, very seriously. Kasasa is a company that deals with banking systems for small regional banks. You know, if you've got a bank with like 20 locations, but you don't want to do all the the electronic interface and all the client-facing stuff, you partner with Kasasa, and they deal with all that, do the loyalty programs and all the banking stuff they do through Kasasa. But they focus on small banks. But if you work at Kasasa, they're up in North Austin, they have this phalanx of 4 core values, and they're represented by that little Spartan with the flames in the heart and the stars. Each one of those represents a core value of the company. We won't get into what they are. But what's important is they pay their employees $2,000 if they put a tattoo on their body that has some kind of representation of that phalanx. Now, that's important to know when you go into a job, I think. To understand is that, do you understand their culture and how important that culture is to them? And does it align with you? I'm not saying go out and get the tattoo. What I'm saying is that you need to understand that that culture is important to them, and they highly value it, and they're very serious about it. And do you see yourself in the corporate images that they display on their website, right? That's one thing you can look at by just looking at their website. The second thing you can do is not a face tattoo, no. You probably would. Maybe you get more for the face tattoo. That'd be interesting if you get more. Next, there's a lot of resources you can do with researching the actual company. And you should know these now, but we're going to introduce them. LinkedIn has a lot of tools that help you learn more about the company. Glassdoor helps you learn about the company culture and what people say about the company, helps you with interview questions. G2 helps you understand about the company products if they have a software product that they're providing. Sometimes companies have an app in the App Store, and it's always useful to look at. And Google, believe it or not, some companies actually have an address. I don't know if you knew this or not. And Google has a place on. My speaker in the next room heard me say the G word, and she's talking to me right now. Thank you. 1 second. I have a Google appliance in the next room, and it heard me say her name, and now she's talking to me. She's very nosy. But anyway, this G company, they actually have reviews of companies on the mapping tool if you want to look at it. So kind of walk you through those on a very high level. LinkedIn has a way to profile a company, and you can learn a lot about a company by learning about what they talk about on their website. you see a profile. If you have a professional version or the job seeker version of it, and I recommend doing it if you are a serious job seeker, because it gets you some other tools. But you can get a good understanding of where the company is in its headcount. You can get an idea of a composition of the workforce to see how you're, how many people are in that space. A little bit further down, there are links of like who the executives are and who the former executives are. And it's important to understand also finding your predecessor. So if you're applying for a job at a company, it's awesome if you can find the predecessor. And you gotta be careful, but I'll walk you through how to do that. LinkedIn, and I would do this live, but I know it would get kind of screwy live. But LinkedIn has a way you do a search, and on the search, you can do all filters. And if you click on all filters, and I'm searching for a particular company, I can apply a search for a company there's different ways you can do this, but it helps you look at current company or past company and a job title. And that's what you're looking for. Look for the company where someone has a previous company, the company you're looking for, and a job title that's similar to yours. And you hit search and see if you find anybody. That's one way of finding a former employee. There's others, but that's, I think, the most useful. Why this is important, and why I give you some guidance on doing this, is you want to have a little spacing. You don't want to find someone who just left the job. Sometimes they got fired and they may not be open to talking to you. I think a year is a good time frame. If you find someone that's been away from the company for a year, that gives them some perspective. Sometimes you don't have a whole lot of choices. And if you've got a strong connection to that person through mutual friends, maybe you risk it and see what you can do to reach out. But I find if you can find someone in the former employee of that space, don't tell them they're looking, don't tell them what you're doing. You're just researching the company, because that's a true statement. But find out about the role, find out about the company, and you keep the information session just to a few minutes. The questions I typically ask are, tell me what you thought of the company, what you like about it, why'd you leave, and if and kind of any kind of feedback or recommendation they would have if you were to go one extra step. Is there another person you can talk to? What would they recommend? That kind of thing. Excuse me. Glassdoor, it's easy to get an account. You have to review another company. So review another company, meaning you got to cough up a salary and where you worked before and what you think of the company. I think it's useful to do. And what it does is gives you access to what people think. So Jask, actually, surprisingly, I have an interview with these guys, and I did this last year, but I actually have an interview on Monday with these guys. And you see that on the bottom that they are highly respectful of the CEO. They highly respect the company. There are reviews of the company that are available you can look at. There are usually job typical interviews. They post the questions in here. It's a very useful tool, but everyone knows about it, including the employer. So you got to be careful with it. Just recognize that it's there. Some employers don't realize it's there, but a lot of them will look and figure out what is on the interview questions and try to change up the interview questions so people aren't cheating. So, but it's good. It's good, useful information if you want to learn a little bit more about the company and the culture, and to see if this aligns with what you're looking for. G2 or mobile apps or Google. Those are ways you can kind of do a quick assessment of their products. G2 is a software evaluation tool. It helps you understand where the strengths and weaknesses are, what feedback are. If they have an app in the App Store, don't just look at the star ratings, look at all the negative ratings. Look at where the product has its shortcomings and understand its strengths as well. And sometimes you'll find on a website the address, and sometimes you'll actually see feedback of the company. There may be a customer who decided to complain about the company, and that's where they posted it for some reason, but that's also a useful tool. Okay, so at this point, you've interviewed 2 to 3 people, hopefully. Some of those people don't necessarily have to be employees. Sometimes you can find people that follow the company or have reviewed an employer, or who have, maybe they're a customer of the company. You gotta be careful with that, but there's ways you can get more than employees. One company I interviewed with recently, I found a guy who wrote an article about the company. It turns out he was brought on as an unpaid consultant to help them through some stuff, and he was unbelievable as far as a resource. And for half an hour, he gave me so much content. It was incredible, very, very giving. If they have a product, have you used it? Some companies have analyst or annual reports or roadmaps they discuss. You've got to make sure you understand what that company is doing, what they're saying, what others are saying about them. And then you need to understand what you perceive in the world that you care in, where they're strong, where they have challenges, and what you can do to fix things. And assuming that's all there, and assuming you think you're a good fit, now we'll walk into the meat of my presentation. I'm only 40 minutes in. So what we're going to do is, where did this go? Yeah, I'll just walk you through it. I'm not going to go into the whole thing. So this should link. Sorry if I had this staged. What we're going to do is we're going to walk through a template. I actually just did this recently. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be sharing this with the client or the potential employer. They passed on me, but I'm going to still share this with them, and I'm going to walk you through it as soon as it loads up. Here we go. Okay, so I have this as a Google Doc, meaning you can go to the Google link. It's actually in the document thing. You can actually bring this over and copy this into your own Google area or download it as a PowerPoint. And what I'm recommending is this becomes a template you can use. And I try to keep it simple because if I needed to change it for a company, I can do it. So the first thing is I need to understand who the company is, whether I'm a good fit. And what I do for the template is I try to use the company colors. So the company I was applying for uses a green and purple motif. I don't quite know their corporate stuff, but I figured out the colors, so not too hard to figure out. And I changed on Google, you can change the theme colors, and I changed the major theme colors to colors that they use on their website and try to use the colors in some way. And again, hopefully they don't recognize it right away, but it helps create a familiarity with what you're doing. I've heard stories where people will, like, I was actually looking at bringing signage in one time, or colors, or wearing a color or a tie or something that has company colors. Any way that you can connect to the company, you and that company, those are subtle ways you can do that. And I think that's a really interesting step. So I use the green and purples as part of my major theme. I use the thing of job title at company, right? Product manager at X. And I did a report for them. That's kind of looking at how we're doing this. This is how I staged it. The thing is that I'm a product manager, but each of you be different. Some of you are going to be in quality. Some of you are in human relations. Some of you are in maybe an accounting or an operational role. Whatever it is, you have a set of things you care about that in the world you're looking at, you're making an assessment. And everything that they do has some impact to those services, right? If you're an HR person, you can see there's a lot of churn at the company, a lot of people leaving, a lot of bad reviews. Guess what? That's a problem. Maybe you can address it. If you are an operational person and you just see that, you know, this thing is a horribly inefficient, you see a lot of complaints for things not working well, you've got operational excellence you can bring into the role. So I provide them in the beginning kind of my basic statement about what we're going to see. I've researched your company. I have a rough assessment. I might not be 100% right, but this is what I'm finding. I've created a very simple SWOT analysis. SWOT, if you don't know, means strengths, weaknesses of the company, opportunities, things that they can take advantage of, and threats. And those are, we'll talk about those individually. And then I create a 30, 60, 90-day plan of what I would do if you hired me, what I would do on day one, but I would try to get done in the first 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days. And then a little bit about me and how I'm related to you from the company. And again, this is a template, and you're going to adapt it to what makes most sense for you. What I did was, in my world of product management, there are three things I have to worry about. One of them is the actual product itself, the thing that we're making. But with it, especially in software development, process is a very strong thing. You'll hear a lot about agile, and agile processing is the process by which we make the software. And if companies have very good process, you notice it, you can see it. And a lot of companies in Austin in particular, especially startup companies, don't. And so the software development lifecycle, the SDLC, is a model that's important. And I have an expertise, but I'm strong in this area, and I look at this in a very different way than most people do. And that's something I'm going to emphasize in people. In the particular role I'm going in, I deal with a lot of people. Soft skills are super important. So everything I'm going to be looking at from their company is going to involve these three Ps somehow. For you, there may be different. Again, you need to understand when you're assessing a company, you're going to work for them, what are the things how are you going to be assessing who they are and how you're going to fit. All right. So in this particular case, and again, try to keep it simple. You can steal my template. I don't care. You might want to change the colors. But I go through the company and I need a rant about how they're awesome. This particular company, the one I interviewed recently, they had unbelievable reviews, like unbelievable reviews on their apps, on their particular app store. It wasn't a mobile app, but it was actually on Salesforce. And absolute solid 5-star ratings. The people were gushing out as far as their compliments for the company. It was incredible. The company product, from what I can gather, was very innovative. I heard that from the consultant guy I spoke about. He was really excited about the innovation that they've done, how complicated it was, but how easy it was to use. And for the small group of customers that they have, very strong bond with those customers and very good relationships. Every case I read, it would be like, oh, this wasn't working, comma, but John came in and fixed the day. And it was constantly like that. Customer support was super high off the charts. Obviously, they had great relationships with their customers. The founder, who was very instrumental in the company, is still there. He's playing a very vital role day to day. And there's a network industry group that they work with that's getting a very, very strong endorsement. Again, you're pounding all of this great stuff. But behind each one of these, there's a problem. And you're probably already figuring some of them out. First problem is, I also double emphasize how great they are in their support. Their support is awesome. The problem is, that's all they're doing right now is supporting. They have a small customer base. They can dedicate so much time into their support. And they have the founder of the company giving support to customers. You can't have first line support from your CEO, right? So that's the first problem. The reviews are awesome, but they haven't had any reviews in over a year. Meaning they've saturated their super excited customer base of customers and they're probably not growing. Just a guess, but that's my observation. They can tell me differently. I'm guessing from the reviews, from the way the customers talk, it takes 4 months at least to onboard a customer. That's a long process to onboard a customer. That's a problem. They know it. They told me they knew it, but it's nice to know that you're going in discovering that ahead of time. And it goes on and on and on. You start recognizing that all of these things, like, think about this thing now, doubling and tripling, quadrupling, and what are the problems they're going to have when they do that? And we've been around long enough to be in organizations where you've seen it happen, and we know what the problems are to our businesses are. If you're in an operational role, you just can't double your workforce tomorrow. If you're an HR role, you've got to be more careful about vetting people as they come on, and you have to have better process for onboarding customers. There's a number of things that we all play in that we understand when customers go through problems. We're already knowing what the challenges are this company's going to have because we have that experience. For me, I look at my 3 Ps, my product, process, and people. And if there's something of interest, I kind of put it as a side note. What did it say here? 1 second. Sorry, stop moving my mouse. Side note. Oh, there's an industry group that actually is their investor. And that counts a little bit complicated when your customer is your main investor. And that was just another challenge that I think they had. And again, I use the word challenge. I don't use weakness. I changed the word. Even though it's a SWOT, I don't call it weakness because that's just, to me, it's a challenge. The next areas were opportunities. So these are things of understanding, if you could do this, here's things that are going on. Like right now, their competition, one of the things about their competition is their competition sucks. Customers hate them. You talk about the 5-star ratings they're getting, this company immediately who gets, their competition is getting lots of 1-star rating. They can get 0-star ratings, they would. And so their customers hate and despise them, but their competition is significantly larger. And so it goes through all those other issues. The thing also be thinking about, we're all thinking about this now, is we need to think about outside the box. What's going on with COVID? How is COVID impacting the customer? How would you think of COVID in the world that you know, because you know this industry, you know this company, you know this world. How is COVID playing? And come in educated as opposed to asking them questions. Come in with a guess. You may be wrong, but come in with a guess. This particular customer, messaging, they're having a really big problem with keeping everyone connected, and messaging becomes a really important thing, and virtual connecting is going to be really important with their customers. Their process is going to suck because they have John is their savior, and John doesn't clone. I don't think you can clone today. It takes a long time to clone somebody. So a customer support's going to be hurting really bad. And they've also lost some key talent. So that's another thing I've heard a lot about. And there's some threats. And again, you're getting this through your assessments. And again, don't get too carried away with these. Touch on them enough where each one of these things you're doing, you're talking about, but you're not judging. This company's gone through 3 CEOs, right? So I just said executive management changes. Am I judging it? No. The challenge here is, and you might be able to say this in the right audience, is that the founder is no longer the CEO. And they've been 2 CEOs since and he's still with the company, but now there's different levels of CEOs, and that's a different set of challenges. Just say it. You don't have to say anything about it, just a challenge. And if you can do something about these, and you have experience in dealing with customer support issues and how to scale customer support, you're all over this, right? And these are the things that you're bringing up because you can do something about them. So we went through strengths, with opportunities and threats. Your 30, 60, 90 plan, I made this really light, but I think you need to add a little bit more meat. In fact, I do too. But your first day on the job, you need to be clear what you're going to do the first day. A lot of times you're coming in and replacing somebody, and you need to establish yourself in that role quickly, especially if you have a lot of experience you're bringing in, even though it may not be a director or a VP role. You're coming in with experience, and you're coming in with leadership that's built into you. You need to establish that in a very constructive way on the very first day. What would you do the very first day on the job? And for me, it's identify all the key people and do as best I can to meet as many people as I can on that first day, and make sure I understand clearly before I even start what the objectives of that group are, and what their immediate concerns are, at least what people are telling me. I may have different concerns, but make sure you understand those the first day before you even show up on the job. And then you start building it out from there. Within 30 days, you want to find something that you can start forming some kind of change. Within 60 days, you want to nail little wins. When you're working with someone and you got little wins along the way, by the way, we had our first stand-up scrum meeting. Yay! We did our first checklist we've ever done on getting a customer onboarded. Yay, right? Some little things that are simple things you can do that demonstrate you're showing leadership and you're implementing change. And you're mindful that you're trying to get those things done quickly. And then after 90 days, a quarter, this is where you're going to sit back, you're going to look back at what you've done in the past, and now you're building a plan going forward. Okay? Last thing on this area is what I'll call shooting for the stars. And these are things to be thinking about of just like game changer. There's a concept in hockey, and if you know Malcolm Gladwell, he did a talk on this. It's called pulling the goalie. And in hockey, when you're way behind and you're down by a goal and there's only a few minutes left, in hockey, you're only allowed 6 players on the ice, but one of those guards the goal. It's an important role to play in a game where a puck is about this big and the goal is much larger. So you need a body standing in front of the goal. Well, when things are really, really bad, often teams, as a last-ditch effort, will pull the goalie. and it gives them an extra player on the ice and a better chance of doing something really amazing. And there's been amazing games won in hockey from pulling the goalie. So these kind of shoot for the star goals are like that, right? Not necessarily feasible, but things that are idea oriented, things that are somewhat dreams based on your interviews, based on what you know. What would expand their business in a new world? How would you approach it? Maybe you don't know a lot about their business, but gee, this is an insurance business, and I've been looking, and I know a lot about life, a different part of the business, or a different world that's similar. Investors, investment business is very different, but it has a lot of similarities. And you know what? We can apply what you're doing here in a whole nother market with very little investment. Maybe there's a new technology we can acquire or use. A lot of companies are using Slack as a chatting tool. And guess what? If we brought Slack into our business and there's interfaces that allow us to adapt it easily, we can improve the communication with our field and really hit the support issues in a different level we could have done before. And I notice you're not using that now, et cetera, right? And you're thinking of a couple of shoot the star kind of examples. Wow, I'm running out of time. So you have plenty of time for Q&A. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, we did have one question from an attendee. I'm thinking about getting some certifications in product development just to remain relevant, even though I have innovated and operationalized my entire career. What do you recommend?
That's a tough one. I've noticed a lot of people have gotten like project management certification, PMP, which is expensive and hard. I know Agile is an important thing to demonstrate. And I don't want to say it depends. What I've noticed with certifications, especially if you're in any kind of leadership role, in a product or project-oriented role, is that if you don't have the background, it doesn't matter what your certifications are. So you have to be able to demonstrate that you've done the job, that you've done the leadership of a project or working on a product. The certification is a nice proof point, but the certification itself doesn't demonstrate, won't make a big difference. Some companies, Casasa is one of them, is really, really strong on Agile and strong on Agile certification. However, they also go through the effort of training the people. And so they may not be a barrier for some companies. So the important thing is to understand, is it a barrier? Do you feel it's a barrier? Like if you're not fluent in the technology and the terminology, Agile has a lot of terminology. If you're not fluent in the terminology, then you better figure that out. And certification might help you get there to understand the proper way of using the terminology. If you just think it's a certification thing, but you know the terminology, you've done it a million times, I don't think it makes as strong of a difference. Okay. We're out of time in 1 minute, so we finish the slides and we have plenty of time for Q&A. So one of the things in here, and I added this later, is that if you have a very broad group of experiences, well, I bundled mine up in little boxes, trying to show my early career, I did these things, and here's how it applies to your role today. In the early part of my career, I was in startups, and I had these kind of roles, and this is how it applies to you today. And so you think about your experience at any time. It doesn't have to be chronological. You don't make this chronological. This is just by whatever grouping you feel is important. And these are how it applies to your role today. And make sure this is a great way of spinning out all of this into a way of understanding all the strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats. Here's all the skills I bring to this, and boom, here's how it relates to you. If you don't know SOAR, and there's a whole video on SOAR, we'll talk about SOAR. These are stories that you'll talk about, how you saved the day. It's a situation of, my company was had a sucky process. The obstacles were they didn't like process and they thought process was too bulky, didn't want to buy a tool. So what I did was I created a little checklist on Google Doc that was free and super easy to do. And we started using this in the process, and the results were we now had a checkout process and our customer support issues were cut in half, right? That's a SOAR example. And you need to have a ton of these in your resume, a ton of these in everything you've ever done that helps you mentally understand it. You don't necessarily have to put it in this deck in the same format, but I'm just putting this in here to understand as you're going through these examples, as you're narrating these stories, this is your narrations. These are the narrations that you're doing. talk about who you are. These are our testimonials I got from LinkedIn. I changed the names, but you may have other things, but these are proof points of what your superpowers are, and then a nice little thank you. Okay. Let's go back to here. Let's take some Q&A. I've got a bunch of other stuff on this, but let's if you got a bolt, I'm going to show you one last slide with got my name on it somewhere with all of my stats, and I want you to feel free to reach out. Where did it go? Here we go. Reach out to me if you have any questions. If you want to get a one-on-one, I have no problem with that. I might limit your time, but my LinkedIn profile, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And then the bit.ly is where the documents are. If you got a bolt, but I'll take whatever questions people have right now.
Feel.
You can unmute.
Yeah.
Okay, let me take some more then. Right, what I've done also is I'm putting together in here the different places you can link, a lot of different books I'm recommending. I've got some neat little templates in here that will walk you through with, look them up. In here I got the presentation. I've got a way you can do a target profile. So with the target profile that came out of this transitions book, this one allows you to understand how to not just target the customers, the companies, but the style of the company, the leadership issues, what you like, what you don't like. It's a really interesting book, but I have the worksheet that comes out of that. Your 3069, your 3 questions, there's a template you can follow that help you work through all that. There's a woman named Abby Alpott that does a book. There are typical 12 questions that people do in resumes and how to prepare for those. There's a link. There's an actual document you can read on that. Lots of resources, lots of stuff you can do. But the 30-60-90 plan I recommend for your top, the top companies you're going after. Even if you don't show it, it helps you organize for the interviews and be better prepared. Okay, I take the hint. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm very passionate about this. I really think this stuff can help, but the most important thing you can do is really be thinking about not just these resources, but working with people that are going to help you along the process. There's a show of hands. Does anyone want to do any networking right now? Teresa can set up an opportunity for you guys to do networking. There's a tool you can use if you have a yes/no button on your participant list. You can give you, if you're interested, you can raise a hand or say yes if you want to do some networking. So far, no one's raising their hand. So I think you're tired at this point. That's good. Go out and get some exercise. It's nice outside. Talk to someone. Reach out if you have any questions. I'll have to hand it back over to you, Teresa.
Thank you, Mike. This has been wonderful. And thanks everyone for attending. As I put in the chat box, we have more events coming up in June and July. They're listed at our website, austinup.org. For now, thank you so much for being here. And Mike, thank you very much.